On June 9, 1909, a disaster unfolded at the Canadian Soo Locks in Sault Ste. Marie. A massive lockgate failed under pressure. 4 ships were caught in the rush. 2 sank. 1 was torn open. Another was swept downstream. The iron arteries of the Great Lakes were cut, and Michigan felt it first. You're listening to End of the Road in Michigan, where we pull over and take a closer look at the historical events that shaped this state. Sault Ste. Marie, straddling the border between Michigan and Ontario, is home to one of the busiest freshwater shipping lanes in the world. In 1909, it was even more critical. Iron ore, coal, and grain, nearly all of it moved by lake freighters, had to pass through one narrow gateway between Lake Superior and Lake Huron, the Soo Locks. Both the U.S. and Canada operated adjacent lock systems. On the afternoon of June 9th, a routine lock-through became a full-blown disaster on the Canadian side. The steamer Assiniboia, part of the Canadian Pacific Railroad line, was being locked down alongside the Crescent City, a steel freighter. At the same time, the Perry G. Walker, a Gilchrist Line vessel, was coming upstream to enter the lock. According to reports from the Detroit News and the Daily Nugget, one of the upper gates gave way without warning. Water from the higher level surged into the lock chamber like a tsunami. The surge hit the Empire City, another freighter just exiting the lock, tearing a hole in her bow. She managed to avoid sinking, but the damage was severe. The Perry G. Walker was hit by the rush and dragged backward through the lower entrance. She sank near the bottom of the canal. The Assiniboia was slammed by the water but made it to the American side, where she was tied up and slowly sinking. The Crescent City, which had barely entered the lock, was ripped sideways, holed, and sank at the center of the river. 4 massive steel gates were torn from their hinges and swept downstream. The canal was in chaos. The Daily Nugget called it the worst accident ever happening at Sault Ste. Marie. Ships floated free or grounded themselves. Water continued to pour in from the higher elevation above the failed gates, flooding the lock and threatening to wash out nearby piers. Officials said the accident likely began when the Assiniboia struck the gate during her entry, but the precise cause was never publicly confirmed. The real problem wasn't just the collision, it was how vulnerable the entire lock system was to a single point of failure. The remaining emergency gates weren't built to withstand that volume of water. The canal couldn't be fully shut off. Engineers worked around the clock, even attempting to drop movable dams into place above the locks. The surging waters from Superior continued pouring in. The maritime backlog spread fast. More than 200 ships were delayed or rerouted within days. Entire shipping fleets were sidelined. At the time, the American PO lock was already handling massive freight volumes, but with the Canadian locks out of commission, pressure on the U.S. side mounted fast. Back in Pittsburgh, Chicago, and Detroit, mills and factories began to worry. Iron ore was trapped in the north. Coal deliveries were missed. The Great Lakes industrial engine was sputtering. But what followed may be even more remarkable than the failure itself. As waters from Lake Superior surged through the lock, crews immediately deployed a massive emergency swing dam, a structure designed to pivot into place and partially stem the flow. It worked. Without the swing dam, the situation could have been far worse. The lock chamber was cleared of water, and by the next day, repairs were already underway. Miraculously, the Assiniboia was back in service within 24 hours. The Perry G. Walker was raised and refloated 3 days later. The Crescent City, which had sunk in the middle of the canal, was also raised and repaired within a week. Full lock operations resumed just 12 days after the failure. At a time when heavy equipment and repair materials moved by rail and barge, that pace was extraordinary. Officials understood this lock wasn't optional. It was the primary artery for moving cargo between Lake Superior and Huron. Years later, as water levels in Lake Huron dropped, a large steel structure appeared on a sandbar near Echo Bay. Locals believed it was one of the original gates lost during the 1909 incident, but no confirmation ever came. To this day, it remains a maritime mystery. The damage forced a rethinking of how vital these lock systems were to North America's economy. The 1909 failure showed just how fragile it all was. That realization would shape the next generation of infrastructure investments. By 1914, upgrades were underway to expand capacity and reliability on both the American and Canadian sides. In time, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers would dominate lock construction, building what became today's modern Poe and MacArthur locks. In a 2016 Homeland Security study, a modern-day shutdown of the Soo Locks was described as a national threat. A 6-month closure could cost over $1.1 trillion in GDP and halt over 10 million jobs across the country. And that estimate didn't even include foreign trade. It all comes back to what happened that June afternoon in 1909, when 4 ships were caught, 2 sank, and the locks that moved a continent were brought to a halt. This has been End of the Road in Michigan. Thanks for riding along.